So, very welcome to Norra Latin, and a day just all about CVD, cardiovascular diseases. Väldigt välkomna till en hel dag om kardiovaskulära sjukdomar i allmänhet och några specifika diagnoser då, som vi också ska berätta och få höra talas om. Och jag heter Penilla Gunther. Jag är grundare av den här mötesplatsen som heter FOKUS patient. En mötesplats för hälso- och sjukvårdsfrågor, life science och inte minst ur ett patientperspektiv, därav namnet. Och jag är extremt glad att ha ett samarbete, att vi som FOKUS patient har ett samarbete med Global Heart Hub. Och jag ska få glädjen här att få välkomna grundaren och vd:n för Global Heart Hub, Neil Johnson. Very welcome, Neil, to the Stockholm and the CVD FORUM today, and happy to have you as our collaboration partner for FOKUS Patient, and we're extremely happy that you have also brought so many distinguished guests from all over the world, nearly. So please.
Thank you very much, Penilla. I'll skip my opening in Swedish if you don't forgive me. I'm from Ireland, of course, and we have strong linkages with this part of the world. I think the Vikings paid us a visit in the early centuries. It's my first time to Sweden, and I have to say, what a beautiful country and what an absolutely beautiful city. It's an absolute honor for me and for the Global Heart Hub to partner with FOKUS Patient on this event. And thank you, Penilla. We know each other for a good number of years, and this clearly is a great synergy. So I'd like to thank you and Matthias and all of the FOKUS Patient team for working with us and putting today together as part of your 3-day program. And I think it's a fitting partnership, and we're delighted to be very much part of the discussions throughout the day. By way of introduction to the Global Heart Hub, just to say to you that my own background is in working with a patient organisation in Ireland for the last 30 years. And in recent years, in meeting other patient organisations across the world, I began to realise that the same unmet needs permeate irrespective of what part of the world you live in. And the other thing that has struck me very forcibly in recent years is that while in other disease areas the patient voice is growing from strength to strength, for some reason in the cardiovascular world we haven't been as united and as together and as loud as we need to be. And for that reason the Global Heart Hub has been formed as an alliance of heart patient organisations. And I'm delighted, as Penilla mentioned, that many of our affiliates are here with us and are participating in the program today from US, Canada, and across Europe. And there's huge value in even just being together and connecting and sharing experiences. In the program today, we have a number of areas where the Global Heart Hub is currently active, in the areas of heart valve disease, for example, heart failure, cardiomyopathy, ASCVD, and women and heart disease. So there's plenty in the program, which I hope you'll get a chance to dip in and out of some of the sessions. And I'd also maybe just draw your attention to the fact that we have a stand at the end of the hall. We'd encourage you to stop by and learn a little bit more about the Global Heart Hub. And of course, one of the ideas or opportunities for being part of this program is that perhaps we can extend our network to this part of the world, in the Nordics in particular. So any of you out there involved in patient organizations who'd like to engage with us, please come and say hello, and we'd be delighted to tell you more about the work we're doing. Back to you, Penilla, and thank you very much, as I said, for this opportunity.
Thank you. And I take it in Swedish now,
yes,
because
okay. So I'll step out now.
Well, first in English, because we are, as Neil said, we are focusing on 3 specific areas as well, and we will have speakers who will have their own seminars about that. But we also thought it should be valuable to bring a Swedish a patient in for one of these. And det första patientmötet, för vi kommer att ha flera seminarier under dagen när vi möter olika patientföreträdare inom hypertrofisk kardiomyopati, hjärtsvikt och även då hjärtklaffsjukdomar. Och då tänkte vi att det vore väl fantastiskt just att få möta en av de första som är svensk och som inte, tror jag, är helt okänd för de här svenska deltagarna och kanske till och med också för de internationella här. Så jag lämnar över ordet till Hanna Brodda som ska prata med Jonas Wahlström från Skansen-Aquariet. A warm welcome.
Great. So you hear us everybody? Vi ska ju prata svenska nu, ja, precis. Trevligt. Hanna Brodda heter jag. This session will be like 10-15 minutes, so if you don't speak Swedish you can just wait and have a coffee. But Hanna Brodda heter jag är journalist och vi ska ha det viktigaste perspektivet nu. Jonas Wahlström som är ägare av Skansen-Aquariet. Han är också patient. Råkade ut för ett hjärtklaffsproblematik för en tid sedan. Välkommen, nu ska vi höra att du hörs också.
Ja, jag hörs så här. Kommer att prata i det här tonläget. Säga att Skansen-Aquariet är öppet året om jag får chansen för det.
Det är lite reklam. Ja, berätta lite grann. Jag vill ju jättegärna att vi ska tänka på hur vården kan bli bättre och hur ser egentligen patientresan ut. Och det är därför vi vill ha dig här. Jag vill höra lite grann, hur var det för dig?
Jo, det var väl en omskakande upplevelse faktiskt. Det började med i januari att jag fick hög feber. Och i samband med det fick jag hög puls. Jag har gjort 6 hjärtkonverteringar tidigare och de brukade hålla i ett år ungefär varje gång. Och nu sammanföll det här med febern. Jag hade 40 graders feber och 120 puls. Och talade med min husläkare, så det var ju covid så att jag fick inte träffa honom, men han skrev ut antibiotika. Och den verkade inte. Jag skulle ringa efter 6 dagar om jag inte kände någon skillnad, det gjorde jag inte. Och då fick jag någon ny medicin, det var någon konstig medicin, bara 3 piller, 1 om dagen. Väldigt ovanlig medicin, sa han. Men det tog ju bara 3 timmar så försvann ju feber nästan när jag hade tagit första pillret. Men andra dagen kom det ju tillbaka. Och jag ringde honom och sa att det här går ju inte. Jag kan ju inte gå här med nästan 40 grader och 120 puls. Ja, sa han, då tycker jag då bör du nog åka in till akuten. Jag har ju läst i tidningarna hur det fungerar på akuten. Där sitter man på en pinnstol en hel natt och så är hemskickad med Alvedon och så dör man i hemmet, trodde jag. Men jag åkte in till akuten, det gick väldigt fort, väldigt smidigt in på ett akutrum och de konstaterade efter en blododling att jag hade streptokocker i blodet. Blev väldigt förvånad att inte min husläkare som hade tagit 2 blodprover eller låtit ta 2 blodprover under en tid som hade gått inte hade kryssat i rutan för blododling. Men där fick de snabbt fram rätt antibiotika och sen var jag intagen på SÖS i 12 dagar tror jag. Och då släppte ju allting. Och sen blev jag utskriven och sen inskriven på Karolinska för hjärtklaffsbyte för dessa streptokocker hade förstört hjärtklaffen. Och det gick också väldigt smidigt efter en vecka och så låg jag där och sen åkte jag över till Sankt Göran för rehabilitering. Och där en natt så vandrade jag upp en lördagnatt och gick ut i korridoren och undrade vad ska du ta vägen? Ja, jag ska ner och lägga pengar i P-automaten. Men du har inte kommit hit med bil, sa de. Jo, jag kom med min Volvo. Jag har aldrig ägt någon Volvo. Jaha, så, vad heter du? Ja, det vet jag inte. Jaha, var är du någonstans? Nej, jag är nog inte hemma. Och då var det ambulans tillbaks till Karolinska för att hjärnröntgenavdelningen på Sankt Göran var stängd under helgerna. Och där gjorde de, när jag gick bars ut ur ambulansen ville jag ju betala för taxin, men det fick jag inte. Och där var det en röntgen och konstaterade ett antal pyttesmå infarkter. Nej, inte hjärtinfarkter.
10 år eller?
Nej, inte 10, så illa var det inte. Små stråkar, men det var ett antal pyttesmå. Så det var inte hela världen. Jag låg där över natten och så tillbaka till Sankt Göran. Och så var jag ju där ytterligare någon vecka eller något sånt där. Sen fick jag åka hem. Sen var det bra med det. Mm.
Och då var klaffen byten?
Den var bytt. Jag har fått en kalvklaff och det fungerar alldeles utmärkt. Alltså man kan säga, en god vän till mig, Peter Möller, som har varit chefsläkare på Sofiahemmet. Han brukar säga att det är väldigt svårt att komma in i den svenska sjukvården. Men när man väl är där inne då fungerar det väldigt bra.
Ja, precis.
Jag ska återkomma till det strax. Ja.
Ja, det var ju mycket information här. Det var ju det här med att du först har tendens till att ha hög puls. Och då åker du in ibland och får den lite så här omstartad för att få ner den. Det där som...
det har skett 6 gånger innan och det är ju väldigt smidigt. Man går ju bara in och får en infart i armen och så blir man sövd och sen så stannar de hjärtat med el och så sätter de igång det och sen så går det som det ska, 60 puls och det är ju väldigt smidigt. Det är ju en ren rutinsak idag. Det enda som oroade mig faktiskt första gången, det var att jag hade hört på Sofiahemmet att du har tur, du kommer till den skickligaste läkaren vi har i Sverige på att göra sådana här konverteringar och det lät ju bra. Och sen låg jag där infarten i och så skulle de precis söva mig och då kommer läkaren in och så säger hej då, jag är den som fixar hjärtat på dig, fattar du? Det är bara titta på klockan här nu, fattar du? Inga problem, fattar du? Ja, tänkte jag, men klockan var precis 1:12. Så tänkte jag, herregud, tänk om man är muslim. Så söver han mig och så stannar han hjärtat och så faller han i Allah akbar och där ligger jag död. Men det var han inte. Han var väldigt skicklig.
Han hade nog, även om
han
han
har
var
gjort det
muslim, hade han nog ändå
flera gånger efter det. Och han har varit mycket bra. Det är fantastiskt snabbt.
Ja, just det. Och det där kan man göra många gånger som helst.
Ja, jag var ju lite orolig efter 5:e gången, men då träffade jag en där i kön och vi talade lite om det där och han sa att jag är här för 62:a gången på 30 år. Så det är uppenbarligen inga problem.
Nej. Så att, men var det som sen gjorde... Hade det med saken att göra att du fick en streptokockinfektion som skadade hjärtat? Nej, det har det inte. De letade omedelbart efter en tandinfektion eller någonting, för det brukar tydligen komma den vägen. Men de hittade inte anledningen, men det har ingenting med hjärtkonverteringen att göra. Nej, men...
Någonting hände i min kropp som skapade dessa streptokocker i blodet, men de har inte kunnat säga vad.
Men ditt första möte med primärvårdsläkaren då, när du kommer in och har hög feber, då gjorde de ingen blododling?
Nej.
Och misstänkte inte infektioner?
Uppenbarligen inte.
Så då var det var misstaget, det var första misstaget?
Ja, och det var de lite upprörda på SÖS där på akuten, att man inte hade gjort en blododling det första man gjorde när man kom in med så pass...
Tyckte de att det var så självklart?
Ja, för dem var det självklart. Det var det första de gjorde. Första blodprovet, det var direkt blododling.
Hur kändes det för dig då?
Ja, det har ju gått bra. Min hjärtklaff går ju som den ska. Och jag har ju bra gener. Min pappa började röka vid 15 års ålder, rökte hela sitt liv och dog klar i huvudet vid 80 års ålder. Min mamma rökte aldrig, hon blev 95. Och första gången jag märkte att mamma hade blivit lite raspig så där, då var hon väl drygt 90. Och jag skulle vara med i Allsången på Skansen, där skulle även Ricky Martin vara med. Så mamma ringde mig och sa, kan inte du ordna så jag får komma upp och titta på Ricky Martin? För du ska väl vara med i Allsången i vanlig ordning? Ja mamma, det kan jag, men Ricky Martin, gillar du Ricky Martin? Ja, sa mamma, han var så fantastisk i alla filmerna med Frank Sinatra. Mamma, din är död. Det var första gången jag märkte att mamma var lite snurrig. Och då var hon drygt 90. Så generna är ju bra.
Ja, lite liksom på slutet så blir man lite förvirrad och blandar ihop stjärnorna. Men,
uppenbarligen, alltså jag har varit förvirrad. Man säger, det jag har märkt ganska tydligt efter det här då, det är att mitt närminne har blivit sämre. Om jag ska åka och göra 2 ärenden på vägen hem så måste jag skriva upp det på en liten lapp. Annars när jag sätter mig i bilen så bara försvinner de där ärendena och så när jag väl kommer hem så herregud, jag skulle ju gjort det och det på vägen. Men jag kommer i alla fall ihåg efter ett tag att jag har glömt bort någonting tidigare. Och det är tydligen en fördel, säger de.
Ja, det är ett positivt tecken.
Jag har ju varit så i alla år. För 20 år sedan så köpte jag en julgran på väg hem från Skansen på Strandvägen. Och när jag surrade fast den på taket så upptäckte jag att bilen är ganska smutsig. Ja, och så glömmer jag bort julgranen och så kör jag in på Slussen i den stora automattvätten. Och när det börjar vifta granris i de där jätteborstarna och folk kom kutandes där, då blir det granjäveln för helvete. Men det var ju bara en vit pinne kvar.
Ja, det är
så jag åkte tillbaka.
Då,
jag åkte tillbaka till Strandvägen och reklamerade granen. Det var bara en vit pinne. Och han som sålde den sa, stå still, du får en ny gran gratis, stå still. Jaha, där stod jag. Så kutade han iväg och öppnade dörren till en byggbord och skrek, kom ut grabbar, ska ni se på den största idioten i hela stan. Jag fick en ny gran.
Ja, så då var det värt.
Ja.
Ja. Men vad tänker du då i efterhand om man tänker hur skulle man ha gjort den här patientresan bättre? Du hade ju kunnat gå väldigt illa för dig.
Ja, det är någon av överläkarna, man träffar ju väldigt många läkare när man är inlagd. Det är ju ingen personlig kontakt direkt, det är det ju inte jämfört med just en husläkare som tyvärr inte tog den här blododlingen. Alltså det var ju ett misstag som gjorde det hela.
Ja. Och då ska man tänka bara att okej, det är mänskligt, eller tänker du, nej men som patient måste man gå läkarlinjen för att förstå hur man ska...
Jag hade ju ingen aning om vad blododling var för någonting. Nej. Så jag förutsatte när han då fyllde i digitalt någon massa kryss på vad de skulle ta för blodprover sen. Det utgick jag ifrån, men
Ja, just det.
man missade det. Och då var jag faktiskt ändå 2 gånger och lämnade blod under den här tiden jag hade feber.
Ja, men ingen blododling.
Det gjordes inte.
Nej. Men för hjärtat hade ju kunnat, det hade ju kunnat vara så att du inte stod här.
Ja, jo, det var en av överläkarna där på SÖS. Han sa ju att hade du kommit in ett par dagar senare, då hade du inte suttit här idag.
Nej, just det. Men vad tänker du då? Blir du bitter eller orolig eller arg? Eller? Du verkar ju vara liksom positivt lagd. Men...
Ja, alltså ska man hålla på och anmäla det där som... Nej. Man får inget för det i alla fall.
Nej.
Min fru fick amöber i levern efter en resa i Burma. Och vi var 2 par som åkte till Burma. Varje morgon så tog Lars-Erik och jag varsin whisky. Och varje morgon fick vi skälla våra fruar för vi tog varsin whisky. Och vad hände då när man kom hem? Jo, bägge fruarna hamnade med amöber i levern på 2 olika sjukhus. Lars-Erik och jag, inga problem alls. Och min fru hade oturen att hamna hos specialisterna. Medan Eva hamnade hos vanliga läkare på Karolinska. Kristina hamnade på SÖS. Och specialisterna sa att det här är inga problem, ska vara en eftermedicin i vissa fall, men det behövs inte i ditt fall. På Karolinska bläddrade de i böckerna och kom fram till att men man ska nog ge en eftermedicin, vilket Eva fick. Inga problem, frisk och kry. Efter en månad så säckade min fru ihop med en apelsinstor amöbasvulst i levern för att hon inte hade fått den medicinen som de borde ha gett. Och det var ju ett jävla liv och de blev ju prickade. Ja. 2 överläkare, varav en amöbaspecialist prickade på SÖS. Och Kristina fick den, för hon blev uppmanad av patientföreningar och så vidare och anmälde det hela. Och hon fick den generösa ersättningen av 6 000 kronor. Så jag menar, det är inte värt att bråka.
Ja, det är ju...
Om man dör kan man ju bråka, men det är aningen för sent då.
Ja, då kan det ju vara lite sent. Är det någon här som har en fråga till Jonas? Ni får gärna ställa en fråga. Jag undrar lite grann om eftervården. Hur är den när man har bytt?
Ja, det var det jag skulle återkomma till. Alltså, Peter Möller sa ju att det är svårt att komma in i den svenska sjukvården. Och jag kan intyga att det är lika svårt att komma ur den svenska sjukvården. Därför under 3 veckors tid blev jag kallad till Sofiahemmet för efterföljande hjärtundersökning. Jag blev kallad till SÖS för efterföljande hjärtundersökning. Jag blev kallad till Karolinska för efterföljande hjärtundersökning. Och till Sankt Göran för efterföljande hjärtundersökning. Så det är svårt att komma ur den, måste jag säga.
Så att eftervård känner du att det är...
Ja, rehabilitering om man ska stå hemma med gummiband och hålla på.
Ja, du vågar träna idag?
Ja, det har jag aldrig gjort riktigt. Tränat.
Nej, det har du aldrig. Nej, okej.
Fortkörning är enda sport jag ägnar mig åt.
En fråga?
Jag delar ungefär din historia. Men vad som slog mig var att eftervården var ungefär 18 månader för jag hade kvarvarande inflammation i benet. Och besökte läkare var 3:e dag, ungefär 150 gånger då. Hur många gånger tror ni att de ställde någon fråga om min mentala hälsa? För den kan ju vara kopplad till just så här allvarliga sjukdomar. Nej, tack. Jag tror att samma sak är helt för dig.
Ja, det är väl ingen direkt som men jag gick igenom en sån där test efter att jag fått de här små propparna i hjärnan. Då kom det ju en där upp på rummet med en formulär. Och då så skulle jag ju räkna baklänges och sen så hade hon 3 bilder. Det var en på kamel, en på ett lejon och en på en hyena tror jag. Och sen vad är det här? Och hade förväntat sig att jag skulle tveka om det var eller också säga att det är ett lejon. Och jag kunde säga det här är ett abessinskt lejon för du vet manen går här under buken på det här lejonet till skillnad från det kenyanska lejonet. Och där går manen på det här sättet och så vidare. Det var fel person att fråga vad ett djur heter. Så jag har inte fått, men det tydliga märker att närminnet har blivit lite sämre.
Ja, då kollade de egentligen att din hjärna funkar, men inte så här hur du mår.
Ja, nej, det var att jag liksom hade kapaciteten att de inte skulle dra körkort och sånt där som de är pigga på ibland.
Ja, men vad härligt. Du ska tillbaka till jobbet nu.
Ja,
och du
det är enklare att vara djur. Ja, men om man till exempel tar en sån här jättespindel. Den har inga hjärtklaffar, det är väldigt praktiskt. Den här lilla spindeln har istället för hjärta en liten kanal med en liten pump i. Det är faktiskt allt. Och det klarar ju de sig på. De spindlarna blir upp på 30 år pigga och glada. Så det är bättre att vara spindel när man har hjärtproblem. Vill du känna på det?
Exakt!
Ja, men du kan få klappa det lite fint.
Man kan också få hjärtproblem av spindlar, jag har hört. Om det stannar.
Ja. Här är en sån här vi har i klapp- och kramhörnan där små barn under ordnade former får klappa ormar och spindlar och lära sig att det är mamma och mormor och farmor säger att ormar är slemmiga och läskiga och så vidare inte stämmer. Så där är spindeln imse. Jaha.
Hej då, nu måste ni gå.
Ska jag gå nu? Tack så mycket. Ursäkta att du inte vill klappa. Ta jag min
skål. Jag låter den söt. Så vi går nu då. Hej då! Hej! Ha det kul idag!
Well, we're causing heart problems. Ja, tack så jättemycket Jonas och Hanna för det här. Och min medarbetare sa när vi sa att Jonas Wahlström ska komma från Skansen-Aquarium så här. Kan han inte ha med en koala? Eller något annat djur. Idag blev det en spindel. Thank you so much. And Neil, you are presenting also one seminar. We will just have a time switch. But first we will have the honor of having two. Let's see, Frida is here as a moderator, and Peter and Faiez. And I will leave the floor soon to Frida. Just come up for a few seconds, Neil. And while they're changing microphones and so on. Just a question for you. Do you like spiders?
Love spiders, yeah. Who doesn't like spiders?
No. But since you're here for the first time in Sweden, how is your impression, from outside about the Swedish healthcare?
Well, actually, speaking to a number of people at lunch yesterday, and my impression had always been, prior to visiting, that the Swedish healthcare system was an exemplar, but and obviously it's very good. But it was interesting that some of the same issues, for example, I was speaking to somebody yesterday who spoke about access to cardiac echocardiography, for example. Same issue that we have many countries in Europe, in Ireland in particular. So it seems, and it would seem that manpower seems to be an issue. So I guess the problems are similar wherever you go.
I think we have really, drained the Swedish healthcare today, because today we have the best cardiologists in Sweden here. So
best place to have a heart attack today, then.
Yes, I think so. So thank you again for being here, and we will leave the floor to Frida and Peter and Faiez.
Well, let's see, so Faiez gets his microphone as well. So now you have to stay put for a bit more, but take the opportunity now, since we're waiting for the microphones, to just move your bodies a bit so you're really energized for this session, because you don't want to miss out on this. Because we will have an international guest, another international guest, and together with one Swedish guest. And these two gentlemen are gonna tell you a lot of interesting things, I think, so you don't want to miss out on this. And the subject is cardiovascular clinical trials, need for new treatments. And soon we have Faiez on stage as well. Great. So, to start with, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Faiez Zannad. Faiez is Emeritus Professor of Therapeutics and Cardiology at the University de Lorraine on Nancy, France, I think, and also at the Clinical Investigation Center in Nancy. But you're also the founder and chairman of the Cardiovascular Clinical Trials Forum, is that correct? And I think a lot of many other things as well, but maybe you can go on with your own introduction. A warm welcome to Sweden, Dr. Faiez. Your area of interest is, of course, cardiovascular clinical trials. That's why you're here, I guess, and heart failure. And as I reckoned, also you're interested in the possibility with getting the right treatment for the right patient, and with the use of biomarkers, for example. So I hope we will have time to get into that as well. But I would like to start with you give an introduction on the subject of this session, that is the need for new treatments, and how are we doing? What are the challenges, and what is going on from your side? Please take the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind invitation. Let me try to have my slides. We are here for same reason. Basically promoting more cardiovascular research in order to have more cures for our patients, and the cures should be evidence-based. So I hope you can see the slides. Here it is. I have been into clinical trials for more than 30 years, and what I'd like to share with you are quick notes about the good news, bad news, challenges, and opportunities. I will not spend much time on the good and bad news, but I would like really to focus on the challenges and how we can do a better job, and the opportunities. But certainly, there are a couple of good news, which are we have been doing a wonderful job so far. The clinical trialists, and certainly in the area which I have been active in, which is heart failure, we have been promoting the highest possible level of evidence with foundational therapy, which are now saving lives and promoting healthier life and keeping patients away from the hospital. Most of heart failure international guidelines are based on the highest possible level of evidence. So that's the good news. And further good news is that we have many more development under the radar. Now, the bad news is that pharma industry is walking away from cardiovascular. Most of them are really much more attracted by cancer research and by orphan diseases because there is a better yield and better payback for them for investment. So don't get me wrong, and I have this cancer support here with me. I'm not denying any reason for improving research in cancer, but we need not just forget that cardiovascular is still #1 killer, and is still #1 expenses worldwide. And we have been doing a much better job than oncology so far, because the cardiovascular mortality worldwide is declining continuously over the last 2-3 decades, not so in oncology. So let me explain why and what are the challenges. This is a slide that is familiar to some people who I can see in the room here, advocates about heart failure, showing the figures of heart failure. It's a dramatic disease. It's very frequent, it's very costly, it's disabling, and this figure is even more a shake-up and wake-up call for all of us as compared to cancer. We need to invest both in cancer and in heart failure, because you see, heart failure prognosis is as worse as most of cancers in men and women. It's only ovarian cancer, which is more severe in women, and lung cancer in men. But otherwise, the bulk of all other cancers are as severe as heart failure. So we really need to pay attention, and this is a matter of awareness. And we know that lots of people are more, emotionally attracted by cancer research, and we need to do a better job for cardiovascular. Now, the other reason is cost of trials is really ballooning, and certainly more so in cardiovascular. Whether this is bad or right, we'll examine that in a second, but these are the numbers. You can see cardiovascular trials cost much more than oncology trial because they are much larger. You can see only for 5 trials, for example, you have 157 billion, while in oncology you have many more trials costing less. This is just very similar, simply related to the number of patients in a trial. And this is mainly driven by the objectives of the trials. In cardiovascular trials, we all pay very much attention to hard outcomes. This means mortality and morbidity. We need to save lives and show that treatment is keeping patients away from hospitalization. So we are counting events, and therefore we need long-term multi-thousand patient trials. And in oncology, they have been very successful and very much helped by the regulatory people. They have smaller trials, greater reliance on biomarkers, so they're happy to show that the drug is active on progression-free survival, they call it. So this is taken into account the size of the tumor, for example, which is a surrogate, which doesn't mean really that if you can shrink the tumor, you will necessarily produce a better outcome. They also very much use the artificial intelligence deep phenotyping, and they have been doing a wonderful job clustering cancer in many sub-cancers and many phenotypes and many genotypes, and therefore we need to do a better job in cardiovascular in this way. And they very much rely on surrogates, as I said, and they have very strong support from regulatory, having this pathway called PRIME, Priority Medicine Recommendation, so they go much faster to approval. And finally, they rely very much on what they call post-approval trials. It's good enough that they show some level of evidence, not necessarily the highest possible level of evidence, provided this is confirmed by post-approval trials. But there have been many post-approval trials did not necessarily confirm the good news on smaller phase 3 trials, and there have been some alarm clocks from regulatory people and clinical trialists showing that, well, we need not be so lenient on approval of cancer drugs, and we would like not much to benchmark that in cardiovascular. We are very keen and proud to have the highest level of evidence, and you can see here there have been a sounding board with an urgent call to raise the bar in oncology. So don't get me wrong, I don't want to lower the bar in cardiovascular. In oncology, they are doing a much good job into approving many more medication, but with a lower evidence. We need to have more trials and more drugs, but still with the highest possible evidence. In randomized clinical trial, we trust in cardiovascular at least. Randomized clinical trial is the most solid evidence generation method, and randomized clinical trials are here to stay. And we'd like to increase the level of evidence, and we value hard outcomes. We need not only rely on simple improvement of sign and symptoms, which is fine, but we like that this is associated with improvement in prognosis. And this is the basis, the solid basis of everything we have been done in cardiovascular. And this is the reason we have large sample sizes. So this should not detract companies, funders, sponsors, whether private or public, from this track of funding cardiovascular research, but because they are more expensive. They are more expensive for good reason. Now, of course, we may make these trials more efficient. We can simplify the many execution. I know that CROs, the clinical research organization, have been adding to the cost because they're obsessive about collecting many minor safety signals, for example. And we can also improve the design of trials. And I will give you a very quick, and I stopped then to have time for discussion on how we can improve the trials. And I can see that sitting among you, Stefan James, who has been actually created this way of making trials simpler, but still yet very efficient. The simple analysis here is that usually we screen patients who are walking in your office, the doctor's office, and try to find out whether these patients are fit to be enrolled in the trial. We get them to informed about the trial, and we get them to consent, and then we would double-blindly randomizing to the active or the control group, the control usually being a placebo. And then we'll follow them with the repeat visits, and then we will screen them and find out whether they have had an event or no event and get to the analysis. This procedure is really tedious, long, and time-consuming and expensive. So there are multiple ways to make these things simpler. We can use routine listings, and I know this country, every one single citizen has got a health record, and this health record is accessible. I can screen this health record for eligibility and find out patients who are potentially eligible. So this would not rely only on the encounter of the patient during a routine visit. Then we can also rely on this health record in order to screen for events, that not necessarily get the patient revisited, and we can find out in the medical record of the patient, which are, in the health record, and therefore this would much simplify the procedure of follow-up. We can also have an integrated consent, therefore we need not this one-to-one stay and explain the informed consent, have this formal, which is very much time-consuming, and then the consent for the whole group. We can certainly make the consent much more, efficient, and the information can be a group information, by the way, and all this can be worked out, especially in a country which is very well organized with electronic health records and accessible health data. So I would like to stop here and open up the discussion, but I would like also to take the opportunity here to invite you to a meeting where I had the privilege to know Penilla, inviting her to this meeting, which is the Global Cardiovascular Clinical Trials Forum. It is now in Washington in the French Embassy, 1st and 2nd and 3rd December. It is examining exactly the topic that you are going to be discussing the full day here today, with multiple stakeholders, and we have a large group of patients, we call them patient trialists, who are very much engaged in the discussion with the regulators and with faculty and with major journal editors, the NIH, etc. This meeting is this year 1-3 December, and you have the website here, and I hope I'll see you there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. You can actually stay there, because when I introduce our next guest here, that is Peter Asplund, since August you are leading the Governmental inquiry in Sweden on clinical trials. And we will get back to that in a few minutes. But since you have another background as well, you have an everyday life. That is at the Department of Anesthetics and Intensive Care in Örebro, I reckon.
Correct.
But you also led the megalith study.
Indeed. So good morning, everybody, and again, thanks for the invitation to be here in this meeting. And I need to stress, I'm not an oncologist, so I couldn't really judge on your comments around the oncology trial from an oncologist perspective, but I have in my prior life managed oncological organizations and equally run a significant number of oncology trials. Yes. So from that perspective, I think I can comment, but not from an oncology perspective necessarily. But I think listening to your presentation, Faiez, the thing that strikes me in this forum is maybe most the choice of endpoints. Because really, I think that really goes back to the clinical community as well as the regulatory community on what are the relevant endpoints that should be guiding our clinical trials and also the introduction of the drugs into clinical practice. And I think maybe from the patient community that there is a lot to be said around the endpoints in oncology trials as well, because to your point, progression-free survival may not be the most relevant patient endpoint. So I think in this forum we should look at the patient-reported experiences and outcomes from the clinical trials, and also have a dialogue on what is important from a patient as well as payer perspective in terms of the level of evidence. So I think there might be some discussions that needs to be had between the Cardiovascular Forum and the oncology side. Yeah. And you made a comment as well around the megalith study, and that is really a precision medicine project that has been ongoing in Sweden since 2017, and we have really similar initiatives ongoing in the Nordic countries and internationally, which is really a project designed at providing patients with clinical treatment, those patients who have exhausted the clinical standard therapy, where there might be biomarker-driven opportunities for adding additional treatments within the scope of a clinical trial. So I think that's really responding to the greater opportunities in diagnostics, i.e. using various omics methods as well to guide our treatment. So that project has been running in Sweden now for 5 years, and we're continuing the collaboration with the Nordic countries. So I think we have some novel designs, novel methodologies to use in our clinical trials as well.
Yeah, and there must be a lot to be learned from the Cardiovascular Forum out of the study such as the megalith study.
Yeah.
So, But we have to move on. We have not that much time. So we have to jump into our next part of this session. And Dr. Zannad, you can please take a seat for a little bit, and I will let Peter take the floor, because as I said, Peter, you are now running the governmental inquiry on clinical trials in Sweden. You've been doing that for a month, a little bit more than that, so I guess you haven't come that far yet. But you will present us with some ideas, creating the roadmap, and what you will do, what you are heading for in this inquiry.
I will indeed, if
yes.
I can find my presentation.
Yeah, so I can go on while you're looking for your presentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Because as we can see in Sweden, clinical trials sponsored by companies has declined over a number of years now. And I represent SwedenBio, and in SwedenBio we do inquiries every second year about that, of all the pharma developing companies in Sweden, their pipelines. And there we can see over the years that the number of companies, the number of projects, and the number of trials is actually rising. And it's a steady rise we see. But the share of trials that is conducted in Sweden is declining. And that is also a trend that we can see going on for a bit. And I guess this is not something that is only going on in Sweden. I think this is part of an international trend where we can see that fewer countries take the broader part of the trials. But nevertheless, it's of course our interest to have more trials in Sweden, and that's why the government have recognized this, can we call it problem, challenge, and now you're heading this inquiry, so please.
Can you help me with that? Because my presentation isn't actually on the laptop, so let's see if we can...
Okay, let's see. Matthias, do you know what's happening? Okay. So would you like to just start a little bit and give us a bit of the background to the inquiry?
Indeed. So I will be sharing some slides with you. But again, thank you for being here, for having me this morning. And I have the opportunity of leading a national inquiry on clinical trials that has been commissioned by the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation. And as Frida says in her introduction, we have seen a declining trend of clinical trials in Sweden over a long period of time. And there is a solid life science strategy in place in Sweden that speaks very clearly to the value of having an organized facilities for clinical trials in Sweden. So the inquiry was commissioned in May this year, and we began our work in August. And I need to look a bit at this here. I would like to start, I need a slide actually to give you the context of that, but for those of you who know a little bit more of clinical trials, we talk generally about clinical trials. When we think about clinical trials, we automatically almost tend to look at the interventional trials, i.e. the drug trials and the medical device trials that is conducted within healthcare. The context of this inquiry takes a slightly broader scope, because when we look beyond the medical device trials and the drug trials, we have a significant volume of other trials which are non-interventional trials. These are observational trials. It's epidemiological studies of various type and type of sampling studies. So in the inquiry, we're taking a broader context, because all of these trials, be it if they are interventional or non-interventional, they're conducted within the same ecosystem, and the trials in themselves mean different things if you are an industry partner, if you're a patient, if you're a regulator, etc. So the context of the inquiry is really to look at the bigger picture, not only look at the drug trials and the medical device trials. So let's see, do we have some slides? You received them over email, but they're on this memory stick as well. So can we upload that? Yeah. Apologies for that.
No, it's not. It's not you who should apologize. It would be me then. So.
No, but I have the dialogue with the audience, so I make the apology for us. Yeah.
But Dr. Zannad, you also mentioned the rising cost for clinical trials, and you know there's changes in prerequisites for doing clinical trials. What do you think? How much is that the impact that makes the harder for smaller countries or countries like Sweden to perform trials?
It's not a matter of size, and actually I'm really surprised that what I'm hearing that the trials are declining in this country, because we usually cite the Nordic countries as being the example, and certainly because you have progressed to the pragmatic registry trials. We know you have much better healthcare organization and electronic health record. And I can tell you, in France, the situation is really much more dramatic. The contribution of patient into trials in France is much lower. So we have basically the same issues. We really need to unite and find out what are the ways to promote.
I'll come on to that with a couple of slides, which I'm sure that you're happy to comment to as well. So again, the inquiry as such, just to kick us off where we intended to start. The remit of the inquiry as such is really to look at measures for creating better conditions for clinical trials. And the key point here is better welfare and a stronger life sciences sector. So I think the end points for the inquiry, if you wish, is not really necessarily increasing number of clinical trials, but we're actually looking to develop something that would strengthen welfare as well as the life science sector, which I think is important to remember. So again, to my point, what is the ecosystem within which we are trying to look into the conditions for clinical trials? In the red box, these are the trials that I mentioned. These are the traditional medical device trials or drug trials. But again, if we widen the scope slightly, we see that there are significant numbers of clinical trials that are not necessarily the drug trials or the medical device trials, and we need to look at those as well. And if we widen the scope slightly, even a bit more, we come on to the studies that bridge between the bench, i.e. in the lab, going into the patient clinical setting. So the context of the inquiry in our analysis work and our work in developing recommendations is really the bigger picture, because these studies, again, are conducted within the same setting. They're addressing us as patients in the same way. They're addressing our regulators in the same way. So the bigger scope is what we're trying to look at. So again, looking at Sweden specifically, I'm sure that many of you have been within this space for a long time. If you're a clinical trialist or if you're a patient, you may even recall going back some 10, 12 years in time, we had a significant inquiry in Sweden in 2013 that was called Strong Together, eller Starka Tillsammans, which was a key national inquiry on the conditions for clinical trials in Sweden. The key recommendation from that investigation was to strengthen the coordination of clinical trials. And we saw the advent of kliniska studier in Sverige that is currently in place and have a coordinating role around clinical trials. Beyond that, over the last 10 years, there is 15 plus national investigations and various investigations that has been done into the conditions for clinical trials. In 2017, we saw the advent of Genomic Medicine Sweden, GMS. And if you look at the agenda for GMS, for the coming years in time, increasing the volume and level of clinical trials is one of the key strategic goals of GMS as well. In 2019, the government issued the National Life Science Strategy. And in that strategy as well, there is 8 focus areas and around 30 activities spelled out by the government. And one of them is around clinical trials. And that is not only the number of clinical trials, but it's the quality of clinical trials, and it's clinical trials guiding the implementation of precision medicine. And beyond that national strategy, there are several regional strategies that have been put in place. So basically all of them speak to the same goal and objective: increase the number of clinical trials and better the conditions for clinical trials in Sweden. So I think we have a very solid strategic support within the country for increasing the number of clinical trials. However, to your point, Frida, where are we going then? If we look at this level of statistic, or this set of statistics, which is from the MPA, from the Swedish Regulatory Agency, it goes back 10 plus years in time, and the trend is quite obvious, as you can see from the slide. These are commercial and non-commercial trials. Both of them are declining. And if we exclude 2021, to look at the trend, we have about a 35% decrease in company-initiated trials in Sweden. And that is basically in spite of the continued increase in clinical trials globally. To your point, Frida, the number of trials totally are increasing. And as well, we have some really strong reports on the positive societal effect and impact of running trials in terms of healthcare development, competence development, actual cost reductions in healthcare. So in spite of solid evidence in favor of clinical trials, a strong strategic stance for clinical trials, the trend is declining. Within the investigation, we're currently doing an in-depth analysis of the development of clinical trials going from global to regional to national. And I brought this slide. It's still in a draft format, but I think it points to a very clear direction, saying the volume of clinical trials globally is definitely increasing as we speak. Interestingly, looking at 2020 and 2021, there is around 7,000 or 8,000 clinical trials initiated within a very short time frame addressing COVID-19. But again, the volume of trials globally is increasing. So what is happening, to your point, Faiez, what is happening in Sweden? This is the share of total volume of clinical trials globally. And as you can see, the trends are pointing downwards, and this is split by phase of a clinical trial. So the drop continues, but the most significant drop maybe is in the phase 3 arena. And without knowing the details, I think some of the cardiovascular trials might be in that space of the phase 3 studies. Interestingly, if we look at number of studies and split that by 100,000 inhabitants and some of the neighboring countries, we see that some of our neighboring countries are doing significantly better in terms of the number of trials per 100,000 inhabitants. And here you have Denmark, Belgium, and Switzerland on the top of that league. And I think being a patient, practically this means a greater number of trials, the greater the opportunity to have access to a clinical trial. So we need to look at some of our neighboring countries and what are they doing successfully that is not necessarily paying off in Sweden. So to the actual inquiry, this is from the preamble of the inquiry. I think, again, the key takeaway here is that this is about patients, i.e. patients having better opportunities for treatments, the implementation of precision medicine, etc. And it speaks explicitly also to the life science sector, i.e. the conditions for the companies, which I think is important. So what are we going to do? We basically have 7 objectives, if you wish, within the inquiry. And to Frida's point, we have been on this for a month, and we are due to report middle of March next year. But basically, if you look at the 3 top things here, is really about an analysis of where we stand today. We are doing an in-depth analysis of the trends over the past 10 years in Sweden. We are looking at the reasons, the obstacles, the opportunities relating to clinical trials. And we're also doing an international comparison by country. What are we seeing successfully in other countries that could be implemented in Sweden? And then the following 4 pieces is really to look proposing measures. We have been charged with looking at the expediency of the support systems that we have in Sweden at this point. We will be looking at the categories of clinical trials that suit Sweden best. And here again, I think to the patient advocacy community, there is a strong message. There is an opportunity to have a say in the type of studies and the categories of studies that should be run in Sweden. We're looking at means and measures for promoting Sweden internationally. We have some international guests in this meeting, and hand on heart, how much do you know about the conditions of running trials in Sweden? So we have an obligation as a country to speak more explicitly to the international community on the conditions for running trials in Sweden. And then the last one is really about making information available on clinical trials. And that goes to patients, to clinicians, to industry, and to healthcare. So making trials accessible. So this is what we have been charged with doing within the inquiry. And we have developed a roadmap to do that. And if you look at the yellow point, that's where we are today. So we're a little bit into the inquiry as such. We are now in a phase of gathering data and making our initial analysis. What that's going to deliver is really a current picture of where we stand today. And then now we're in the process of taking that to the stakeholder community to have the stakeholder community confirm or add to that picture of the current position. And we will then be engaging with the same stakeholders to co-create a mission, i.e. where do we want to be? What do we would like to see as an effect of the recommendations put forth by the inquiry? So really coming towards the end of the year, developing a portfolio of recommendations that would then be assessed for the consequences for the government, and that would be put forward to the government in the middle of March. The key thing here is around stakeholders. We believe that we have a solid opportunity to engage with the stakeholders across the community, and that applies for the patients, for the industry, for academia, for the regulators, as well as healthcare professionals. Without preempting the inquiry, because we are not done yet, but more as a reflection, I think we have a solid life science strategy in place in Sweden that speaks explicitly to integrating clinical research into healthcare. There is a strong consensus in the community on the level of urgency of actually addressing the problem, if you wish, associated with trials. And also, I think for those of you who are more familiar with the Swedish conditions, we see some really significant advances as we speak that moves us in the right direction when it comes to health data, opportunity for sharing of health data, biobanking, IMP distribution, etc. So I think we see a number of things moving us in the right direction. So my final comment is, I think a coordinated and sustainable Swedish offering for clinical trials is within reach. So I truly hope that we should be able to put forth recommendation that can help us turn the trend in number of trials, but more importantly, maybe number of patients in trials, more importantly, maybe than the number in itself. So I'm going to leave this material with you as well. I mean, we welcome input to the inquiry. I'm conducting the inquiry together with two of my colleagues. So we welcome any input to the inquiry over the course of the dialogue that comes over the coming months. So I'll pause there now.
Thank you. As you heard, he welcomes input, and I will take the opportunity to see if we can get some input from our distinguished guest here, since you have a lot of experience of clinical trials from other countries than Sweden, and now we have heard Peter's take on how Sweden will approach this. So both from your perspective from France and internationally, but also from the cardiovascular area, what would you say to Peter?
Of the various metrics you have shared, the one which is of concern is the number as reported to the rate of participation in the report to the total population. This seems that citizens or patients here are less willing, maybe doctors do not offer them much, but because the rank among the other nations is stable, right? And you cannot resist the CRO push into getting to cheaper countries in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. And this is a very, very heavy trend which would shrink the number of participation of Western Europe. And certainly in the United States, they have experiencing even more serious problem. But I am stricken by the number of patients which are really low as a percentage of the inhabitants. Is that related to the awareness about patient and their potential contribution to clinical trials as a citizen's duty, by the way? And what is your take into promoting this awareness of patient and the patient advocacy group also? I know that Penilla is very active into increasing diversity and participation of patients in trials. So this is, I believe, the real target.
I mean, from what we see within the inquiry, and I think generally within the sector of clinical trials, we do not see a reluctancy from patients to go into clinical trials. On the opposite, I think there is a strong drive from the patient community to have access to clinical trials. I think one concern is the capacity in healthcare. If you look at the specialized healthcare or even the primary care, I mean, there is a lack of competencies around clinical trials. There is a resource capacity problem because I think daily healthcare production takes the first priority by good reason. So I think one of the things that we need to address is the capacity of the system. But I think as well, there is a call to the industry here because, to your point, I mean, the industry makes strategic decisions on where to place industry-initiated trials, and we need the dialogue on that. What is the surge? What is the intention from the industry to place trials in Sweden? Where we see an uptake, though, is in the early phases, early phase 1 and phase 1 trials. The trend is slightly different there. There we're on a level or even increasing. So I think, again, Sweden needs to look at where is the highest opportunity in terms of trials to actually achieve a better welfare and a stronger sector. But again, to your point, patients, in my experience, are not reluctant to go into trials. On the opposite.
But that's good to hear. So I understand that it's the healthcare resources and time and brain time of doctors into diverting some of their time to research, which is a real important point. But then it's not necessarily industry. It's the CROs who are mostly taking decision into where to distribute among the various countries. And of course, they go to the low-hanging fruit. They'll go for the cheapest country. This is cost-effective because they're paid per patient exactly the same fare if the patient is enrolled here or in Romania or Eastern Europe, right? And that's what we need really to change. It's not necessarily industry, because most of industry are not running their trials in-house anymore. Most of them are externalizing this to CRO. I must confess I'm very biased against CRO because these have been not necessarily helpful in producing cheaper and more efficient trials. So
I think from the inquiry perspective, again, we are having the dialogue with the various stakeholders. So we are really taking on those comments from the industry as terms of the CROs as well. So I wouldn't comment on that specifically. But again, I think in order for us to achieve a transformation of the system with a good impact, we need that multi-stakeholder cross-sectoral dialogue, because I think there is a goal conflict at this point between industry, healthcare, patients, etc. So in order to achieve a change, given that we have done 10 prior inquiries on the topic, in order for us to deliver change, we need that cross-sectoral communication and make sure that we are aligned what is best for Sweden and what is best for the industry when placing trials in Sweden. So we need that level of dialogue to happen to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
We're running on overtime here, but I still want to see if there anyone in the audience that want to put a question to this gentleman here or a comment. If not, I must thank you. We're running out of time.
Yes.
It was really good discussing with you, and I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.